Hey everyone, welcome to the Her on Top podcast, episode 7. Today we are going to discuss desire issues in relationships and what it looks like when one person does not want sex as much as the other. We get into all the nitty-gritty of how desire works and the many common barriers to desire. Plus, stay tuned at the end of the episode when I, Kayla, give you my little black book tips and tricks on how to create and sustain desire. As a disclaimer, these episodes are based off of my clinical knowledge, but as I am not your therapist, please take care with all that is discussed and talk to your own therapist or seek out a therapist if you're wanting to dive deeper into these topics for yourself. If you enjoy this podcast, please follow us on Spotify, Apple, and wherever you find your podcasts. And don't forget to leave us a rating and review with a comment or question you would like us to discuss in one of our episodes. For more fun and reminders of upcoming episodes, you can follow us on Instagram at HerOnTopPod. All right, let's get into it. Welcome, listeners. How are you doing, Alex, today?
I'm good. I've just had a bit of a long week this week, but it's good. Not bad. Nothing crazy out of the ordinary, nothing too difficult, just kind of blah week. How about you?
Yeah, just another week. Same. We have grandparents here because my mom is out of town. She's our main help with our kiddo during the time that my husband and I are working. So, just a little bit different dynamic in the household while they're here, but overall
Yeah.
good. Just busy as always and trying to make it through each
Make
day.
everything work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Aren't we all, my dear? Aren't we all?
Yes, absolutely.
Alrighty. Well, do you want to kind of get in and let our listeners know kind of what is our topic of today and maybe why we kind of thought we would like to discuss this topic?
Yeah. So, today, listeners, we are talking about desire issues. So, in the therapeutic sense, we call it desire discrepancy. A lot of people call it low libido. Basically, just when you have any type of dynamic in your relationship where one person wants sex more and the other person doesn't. So, Alex, I'm curious for you, what does that kind of mean to you, and why do you think this is an important topic to talk about?
I mean, I 100% I think it's important because I don't and correct me if I'm wrong on this, right? But
Mm,
from the definition you just gave, I don't think that these are things that desire discrepancy. They can
mhm,
be something that happens, from the start of when two people meet and one
mhm,
person just is more how's the right way to say it? Would you say sexually active or enticed to want to have sex? Just well, I guess have a higher desire. We'll just say it that way.
mhm,
When one person has a much higher desire and one really doesn't, for whatever reasons that might be,
mhm,
you get those two people together. There's already kind of an imbalance there. Like I get that one can definitely exist, but I think the more interesting part of this topic and where it probably relates to more people
mhm,
is when you go through periods of it where there was never an imbalance of one person really wants it way more and the other person just doesn't. Like you may have been
mhm,
really connected on it at certain points throughout your relationship. And
mhm.
then you have the ebbs and flows of it because that's completely normal and that happens.
Right.
So I think for me, the importance of the topic and why I really like that we brought this out today is just because I think that is such a common thing that happens for most couples
Mhm,
um, through different stages of your life and kind of looking into the why of it so
yeah,
that maybe I think my goal of this topic would be is if any one of our listeners is able to take one piece of today and go, oh, okay, that's something I can implement for myself in
mhm,
my own relationship when I'm feeling this way or my partner's feeling this way a little bit.
yeah,
So I that's why I think it's a really poignant topic to discuss today. And
mhm,
I think it's also I do think it's interesting too because I think that there's so many factors that can contribute to it,
Yes.
that's where for me, I mean, I look at it and go, were you placed on any recent medications, right? Is it
Mhm.
something medically or chemically induced that is actually changing your
Mhm.
desired level? Is it an issue within your relationship that's occurred?
Mhm.
Or is it just simply like we're busy and I don't want to like use the excuse of we're tired, but almost just like
Mhm.
I don't like at the end of the day, by the time I'm done with this and that and thing, like maybe it's not what you're wanting to go and do at that moment. Um,
Mhm.
so I think there are just so many reasons that can contribute to this that I think that's also a really fascinating part of this topic too, where it's so specific and unique to each
Mm.
different person it happens to.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think kind of taking it a little bit broader, and I think this is a good next step of all the episodes that we've done so far is kind of looking at how are we taught about sex growing up and how does that then lead to our thoughts and beliefs around sex and how we feel in that space when we're with our partners. That one of the aspects like you're talking about that could feed into that is like, are you comfortable with sex? Is that something that you as an individual feel like is for you, is something that you deserve pleasure in and want to experience simultaneously with your partner? Or is it something that you feel like is just more for your partner and therefore is harder for you as an individual to actually like ask for the things that you want and get the experience that you want out of it? And I think for a lot of women, that tends to be the case that we as women and girls are kind of taught, as we've talked about, that sex is confusing. It may even be shameful. It's may not be necessarily something that you are, the one getting pleasure out of. That a lot of what we're taught is centered around male kind of their experience and their pleasure. And so that can actually really dictate how we feel about sex and how we want to enter into it with our partners. So that can also be part of desire discrepancy as well. Do you relate to that at all?
Yes. Yes. Mm, okay, I guess that's kind of hard. I understand it
Mhm.
completely. Does it fit for me? Not as much, I guess.
Okay.
Just because and I think, with anyone who has listened to our earlier episodes, and if you haven't, just briefly, like we're both two people who are pretty fairly comfortable with sex, our bodies, all of these
Mhm.
things.
Yeah.
So I think that does I think you're completely right though. I think
Mhm.
how you were brought up and the way you're taught to look at it is going to
Mhm.
completely shape that for you.
Mhm.
Um, but I will say just thankfully with the way that I was brought up, I don't hold any I feel like I want it just as much as my partner
Mhm.
when we're in the mood and we want this and different things like that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's ever a time where I've experienced where it's like, "Mm, since it's kind of about you or since it's, this or that, I could
Mhm.
take it, I can leave it." Like, and
Mhm.
I read something the other day that I'll just bring up just because it just kind of popped in my head because I read it when I was looking at some trying to look for something else.
Mhm.
And it really made a bit of interesting sense to me. So I would love to hear your take on this part of it, right?
Mhm.
It was kind of looking at like sex and relationships, and it was kind of looking at it in like a long term where you might have like, where you enter into a marriage with this person. And this is a good chunk of time, this
Mhm.
isn't a situationship or a brand new boyfriend or something like that, right?
Mhm.
The idea that the difference between just sex, the act with
Mhm.
someone else, where you're almost using like a version of another person to kind of like help masturbate. Like, and I don't want to make
Mhm.
it that like, I don't want to make it that transactional, but just on the fact that it's just an act that happens, I think that a huge part of it too is what elements of intimacy do you derive that it like fills you up in other parts of you when you do this with your partner versus it just being something on a to-do list that we check off, like we're
Right.
together, therefore we have sex, you know?
Mhm.
That for me is the part where I think that makes a huge difference in it too, is what you feel like you get out of it with your partner. Because if you
Mhm.
get done with it feeling like I am so much more connected to you and, the next couple days feel just kind of different, because
Mhm.
we've had this experience and it really does bond me to you, and there's all these different other reasons and parts of me that get filled up from this act that's not just about just the pleasure you get from it. I
Mhm.
think that's a huge part to look at too with
Mhm.
this topic. And so when I read that, it was just really poignant to me where I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting thought. Like what is the intimacy that you're receiving from this?"
Mhm.
And that's gonna really kinda dictate what it means to you in your life.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I would say a lot of the people that are coming to me to work on this really don't feel like they're getting much intimacy out of the
Okay.
sex that they're having. Either they don't know how to even create a sexual experience where they can get some form of intimacy out of it, or it's kinda goes almost to love languages, if you will, to where,
Okay.
we all have different ways of receiving love from our partners, and I think, you know, not to be the one that always brings it back to gender, but it's kind of what I do. That I do think historically, and it'll be interesting, we've kind of been talking about generations and how things will change over time. So I'm interested to see how it'll change over time, but at least the people that I'm currently seeing right now tend to fall into this trope, I guess, of men typically want intimacy and connection through sex. And it makes sense that that's because that's the box that we give them when they are
Yeah.
young, that we
Yeah.
tell boys and men that emotions are not for you. You shouldn't worry about emotions. Just don't listen to them or turn them off, even though you can't because you're human. Um, and then our praise, like we've talked about, for sex as they, become a teen and an adult, and that's kind of their way of being able to connect to a partner is through
Totally.
sex. Whereas women are often taught the exact opposite, that our connection comes more through communication and having that emotional intimacy of really, diving deep into someone else and feeling like I know this person because they're willing to be vulnerable and confide in me. And so I think oftentimes there is this element of like, we're both not getting what we want because the male partner has a hard time entering into emotional intimacy with their female partner, and the female partner has a hard time entering into physical intimacy with their male partner when they're not getting the emotional intimacy. So it can be kind of a hard balance of trying to figure out, yeah, how are we getting what we want out of sex and how does it create a feeling of intimacy for both people while also like getting the pleasure that we want for
Yeah.
both people
100%.
as well. And I will preface, we are talking a little bit more through heterosexual relationships, but I do also see same sex couples. And I do find that a lot of times these same dynamics are happening in same sex couples too.
Interesting.
So I do hope that eventually we get to a place where everybody just has more education around sex and feels more comfortable around sex and feels like, we can access it more as individuals. And that's why we're making this podcast. Um, but yeah, that's something that definitely happens a lot for couples is that we're just trying to figure out how do we get there. So when it comes to, two people going through different transitions in life, what are some transitions or areas in your relationship, Alex, that maybe you have seen this happen for yourself? Because I know I've definitely had times where I've experienced this in my relationship too.
100%. I think that's I hate to say this because I don't in any way want it to seem like it's not an ongoing problem, but I think this is gonna be the most unrealistic thing that I ever say, and I fully understand how
Mhm.
completely unrealistic this is because
Yeah.
that's not life.
Yeah.
But I like to have the thought in my head that if neither he or I had to work, like, basically, if we were retired at the age that we are right this second, I have this feeling that we would have so much more sex all the time.
Mhm.
All the time, throughout the week, different days of the week,
Totally.
basically like when we started dating, like, it would kinda go back to that, and the interesting thing I'll say is to the old adage of, um, "Distance makes the heart grow fonder," is the one that made me think of this because when we were early dating, before we were living together, because I wanna say I think we dated for about a year where we lived. Well, I guess it was more like a year and a half to almost 2, maybe. We lived in separate places at that time.
Mhm.
So, he would come and stay with me, like, I think our schedule was, like, Tuesdays and Thursdays, he'd come stay at my house those 2 nights, and then he'd go to work at his place in the morning or, whatever, in the morning. And then we'd go to usually his place or my place, whichever one, on,
Mhm.
Friday after work, and then we'd spend Friday, Saturday, Sunday together. So we'd have Friday,
Mhm.
Saturday, Sunday, and then we'd have our Tuesday and Thursday.
Mhm.
We were never not all over each other on that schedule.
Mhm.
Like, on that schedule where we both, like, worked and we had these couple days a week where we didn't see each other on certain days,
Mhm.
it just made it where then when we were back together, like, I don't hate to say this at all. There's nothing wrong with this. But when we were on that schedule, it was basically like a pre-dinner, like, there was never a day that before we had dinner, we didn't have sex. Like, there was never a day that that didn't happen, like, during that
Yeah.
time. And so I think once we went from that to actually living together,
Mhm.
that was a transition where I saw it slow down a little bit, and I think it's also just because we both know we're around. Like, we're both
Mhm.
around all the time. Like, we may go to work all day, and I might see you just at the end of the day for a couple hours, before we started over again, but I've got you here every day, so I for some reason, that element, I think, does play a factor in it a little bit, where I think you
Mhm.
have to kinda work a little more at that, or I've just noticed that we need to work a little more at that.
Mhm.
Um so that's definitely one, where I really did kinda notice that transition change a little bit, and what I will say is when you're in the schedule of, like, Monday through Friday, you're working, he's working, that's
Mhm.
where our brains are at, Monday through Friday, like, we live in America, we're in one of the most capitalist countries in the world, so that's
Mhm.
all our brains go to is, "I am in work mode, and I am in
Mhm.
productivity mode." And I
Mhm.
think that when you spend the whole week like that, then you get to the weekend and it's like, okay, great. Yeah, let's have like way more sex. And let's do like I find us having so much more sex on our weekends than we do on
Mhm.
weeknights ever.
Right.
Because it's kind of like, oh, well, the week is for work. So
Right.
that's to come back to my original statement of I think if we were honestly just retired at like 30 and 36, like we are right now, I think we would have so much more sex because we're not in the Monday, Friday productivity work mode. We just
Mhm.
kinda get to be in a state of relaxation at all times, so it's like, what do I feel like doing?
Yeah.
Which I am fully aware that that is the most unrealistic thing to think of or want. That's basically like saying I win the lottery and I now don't have to work ever again for the rest of my life. Like, that's kinda where I'm not trying to go with this, so I understand that the idea I'm posing is not real life for 99% of human beings, but
Right, but
I
I
just
don't
look at
think
it that way.
yeah, I don't think you're saying it's a solution. It's just kind
No.
of pointing out that
If this
when
was the
we
case,
have less stress and
yes.
we're not, yeah, going through the mundane 9 to 5 and then come home, eat dinner, hang out, and go to bed, there's a lot more room and space for that.
Exactly. Yes, that is kind of exactly where I was trying to go with that. So I think that is for me where I know I've noticed it transition the most. And then I think
Mhm,
it's just I think the hardest part too is also just kind of saying like, hey, like where do we want to add more of this in? Like
mhm,
where do you and I want to add this in? So and I don't love when people really knock on, like, scheduling sex a little bit to a point, because I think that I get, I get the argument that sometimes it can take spontaneity out of it. I totally get that. But I mean, people who are you're a parent. Don't you
Mhm.
have when you're a parent, you have to schedule sex, right?
I mean, it can be helpful for sure. Do I particularly schedule it? No, we could. But
We
yeah,
we could.
it just yeah, it's really, really hard when life is busy, and if you don't intentionally have the moments where you are setting aside to create time with each other where
You
it's
can
just
experience that.
connection
Yeah,
really is the biggest thing, whether it's sexual connection or, like I was saying, emotional connection, and then maybe that leads into sexual connection. It's just really having intentionality around spending time together.
I love
And
that.
I wanted to kind of riff on intentionality because I think that's exactly what you're saying, and you are so normal. I am very normal. I think we all are normal, and the fact that, when we are dating with somebody, I always tell people that even though we want to go up the relationship escalator so fast, and I think we all have this fantasy of, like, living with my partner, and not that it's not great, and I think
You
there's
love it,
real
but
benefits to it, but there's such an intentionality around leaving all of your other responsibilities and really making that time to see the other person when you are living in separate places.
yep,
The time that you are making to spend with each other, you're leaving, all the chores that you do in your house to go spend time with this person. You're leaving
yep.
bills, you're leaving grocery shopping, you're leaving all of these things to go spend time with this person. And so that time is so sweet and so special because you don't have a lot of outside distractions. But once you move in with somebody, now you're doing life with somebody. You have to think about, who's going to clean what. You have to think about who's going to cook, who's going to grocery shop, who's paying the bills. How are we creating a life together where we both have to manage all of these things? And that's not that sexy,
No.
unfortunately. So, having to make more intentional time to spend together can be really challenging when you move in together and make that next step in your relationship. But it can also be a fun thing, it doesn't have to be negative, it's just you have to work a little bit more at it than maybe you did when you first were dating.
I will say I have one really, really funny one that just when we were thinking about this and you were talking about all the different things that we kind of like have to do that get in the way and things like this.
Mhm.
I will say I think the biggest cock block to my poor fiance is my skincare routine.
Mm.
That's one where if I've done that at a certain point in the night, because I don't think we're gonna have sex, I always feel so bad for him when he starts to try. And I'm like, if you wanna go about this, like, old school, like, hooker style where you just can't touch my face because I've just done all of this, I don't wanna take it all off, it's expensive, and I don't wanna re-put all of it back on, then great, we can definitely do it that way. But I love you. I'm so sorry. I just did this very lengthy and semi-expensive process. So that's now there. So like I always or it'll even just be funny sometimes where like I might come out from the bathroom or something and like he might have like had some thought of like, "Oh, maybe I'll try this tonight and see if like we're
Mhm.
in the mood for this today." And then he'll like see the sheen on my face and it's like instant like just disappointment. Like, nope. The skincare got there before I did.
Yeah.
So
I think
that's just an odd one that I'm like, well, I feel bad for him because that one sometimes gets in his way is my
I think
skincare.
mine's kind of the same, but the opposite in the fact that I don't have a problem doing sex after my skincare routine. I'd actually prefer it because then I can just, like, go to the bathroom. Always pee after sex, please. That's a good PSA. Um,
Yeah, unless you wanna
uh,
be like me and get UTIs like every 3 months. Yeah,
yeah,
please do that.
yeah.
Please.
Um, so I can just, like, go to the bathroom and then go to bed, but as a parent, I put my kiddo to bed usually by 7:30. Sometimes it encroaches a little bit to more like 8 o'clock, but usually, hopefully, by 7:30. And then my skincare routine and being in the bathroom is kind of like my downtime in
Yeah,
the evening. But my husband comes home around the same time between like 7:30 and 8. And so he usually gets in bed and eats in bed, which isn't the best, but he works really long days. So that's just kind of his routine is he eats his dinner and then he like hangs out in bed and then goes to sleep. And so usually he's like in bed hanging out while I'm in the bathroom doing my skincare routine, like watching a show, singing, doing whatever I want to do for like 40 to 45 minutes. And so it's usually like, well, that's probably the time that we would have sex if we could have sex or if we would have
We're
sex.
going to.
But that's like me time. So by the time I get in
Done
bed,
with your me time, you're
he's
like, "I'm ready for us time," and he's like, "I'm ready to sleep.
yeah, yeah,
Thank you
exactly.
for taking 48 minutes in the bathroom."
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, you just kind of have to find the time when you can. And that's where scheduling it, if you wanted it more routinely, can be helpful. I will also just throw out a note here that I do think when there is kind of this like, well, one person wants more sex and the other person doesn't, I think in society, we kind of have this idea that, especially to have a healthy relationship, we need to be having sex a certain amount of times for it to be like, we're not going to fail as a relationship. And I will just say that it really does not matter how much sex you are having. It's
No.
more about the quality of the
And your
sex that you
fulfillment.
are.
It's like if
Yeah.
you feel fulfilled with what is happening in your relationship,
Yeah.
great for you. If that's once a month and you're like, "That fulfills me and him and we're
Mhm.
fine." I
Yeah.
know people who are like that.
Yeah.
I just I maybe am not like that, my partner is not like that, but I do know people who are like that, so I
Mhm.
think you make such a good point too on that, where it's like, if you're getting what you need out of this, there's no
Mhm.
magic number.
Mhm.
Like, no,
Yeah.
it's subjective, it really is subjective.
Yeah. So if there's anyone out there that's feeling anxious around how much you are having sex, I would shift that question to what is the sex that you are having and are you both satisfied and fulfilled with the sex that you are having? If not, then that's, where the focus should be, but it really does not matter how much sex you have. It really just matters what the quality of it is and if you are feeling satisfied and fulfilled by it.
Okay, I have a question that kinda comes into, like it definitely comes in a desire discrepancy, but on a way more temporary time frame
Yeah.
and with a specific thing that has prompted it that
Yeah.
I really kind of want to ask your opinion on and your clinical expertise on this.
Okay.
Okay. So let's say you and your partner are having I don't even, you know what? I am so sorry, listeners. I don't even know why I'm giving you this subjective thing. We'll just say it's me because we all know it's me. This is no one else other than me. Like, this is ridiculous. I don't even know why I'm trying to pretend like it's not. So, if me and my spouse are having a little bit of like a hard couple days, right? Like we've had emotional, family, other types of interferences that have caused undue extra stress
Mhm.
into our relationship for a couple days, right?
Mhm.
And you feel like you're kind of fighting for a couple days. Like you feel like you guys are just not on pace. Anytime you're like kind of doing whatever, there's a little bit of this tension from something else is still kind of lingering and it hasn't gotten resolved yet. Whatever this emotional issue between the two of you of whatever's going on, it's not it hasn't hit its end cap yet. Like it's still kind of trailing on in different ways, right?
Yeah.
So, after a couple days of something like that, I really would be interested to know why and I mean, I have a feeling of why. I have a hypothesis, but I don't know if I'm anywhere correct. Why is it that when you do finally bridge the gap of getting a bit done with that problem, or you both at least, even if you haven't solved all of it, you both are just emotionally spent where you don't want to be in this negative emotional space with your partner anymore. We want to move past it. We want to be back to being us and feeling like ourselves in our own relationship, not like this stressful tension state.
Mhm.
Why on earth is the sex after that some of the best sex you have? Why? I don't want to get in a fight with you to have better sex. I don't want to do that. I don't want to create a stressful situation. But why on earth is the sex so bloody incredible after you've just had a state of like stressful tension with someone for a couple? Is it like "Oh, I've missed you." So, like, emotionally and intimately, I've missed you, so I'm just so excited to have that back again. Like, I don't know why, and I am not in any way saying, Connor, PSA, I promise you, I'm not gonna start fights just for sex. Like, I that is not where I'm going with this. I will not
Yeah.
do that.
There are some couples that do that though, which I would say is not
Really?
healthy. But
Like,
yeah,
they
I mean,
actually, like, start one just so they can have the more
well,
kind of
I don't know if they, like, intentionally start one, but I think there's are some couples that are kind of volatile, and the only way that they connect is through sex, and so they're probably gonna be, like, fighting a lot, and then the only way that they're connecting is through sex, and so there's probably gonna be a lot of makeup sex, but anyway, I'm deviating for what you're talking about. Um, the answer to your question, I would say, is twofold, and you kind of even alluded to that there's a lot of stress and tension. So if we think about sex in a physiological sense, you know, we're building up stress and tension to hopefully have this release at the end, right? That
okay,
we're hoping to get an orgasm. Definitely not necessary to have a
good sex,
you know,
but
a
we
good
hope.
experience, but we all hope. And orgasms are always great. And so, there's a buildup of tension, and then there's finally this release. There's finally this release of like, yay, we're back in it with each other. We love each other so much. And this is our way to connect with each other after this kind of rupture. So I would say there's that. And then also, again, emotional intimacy. How do we build emotional intimacy? Usually through being vulnerable. And a lot of times it means working through problems together as a couple and hopefully with vulnerability, getting to a place where we can understand each other better, we can hear each other better, we can resolve something together. And every time we go through that process, it makes us feel stronger in our relationship. That if you think about the beginning of a relationship, things are so fun and so new, but it is kind of stressful. It's really kind of volatile because you're not really sure where we're
Where you
going
both
with
are at.
this. Yeah, and we're not sure how much we can trust each other. And the more that we continue to work through problems and come out on the other side, we trust each other more, we feel connected more, and we feel like we're stronger as a couple together. So if you are able to actually work through the problem and get to the other side and we're able to feel connected through vulnerability, you're going to feel really connected to your partner. And for a lot of people, that's kind of the precursor to what they need to actually want to enter into a physical connection, too. So then it leads to, oh my gosh, I feel so emotionally connected to you. And now I want to physically connect to you.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. I knew we were going over this today, and so I had that kinda in the back of my head, and I was like, "I really wanted to ask you about that."
Hmm.
That makes sense. Okay.
Hmm.
I'm not as crazy as I thought. Okay.
No.
That's always a good thing to know.
Yeah. So makeup sex can be really good. I would say, again, don't just start fights to have sex because that's probably not going to actually end up where you want it to end up. If we're just starting fights and not actually resolving them, that's a whole other issue. Um,
That's a
but
whole other issue you've got.
yeah. Hello, beautiful listeners. This is Kayla, your host. As you know, I am also a licensed therapist and specialize in working with couples and individuals on all things relationships and sex. If you are listening to this podcast, are a Washington state resident, and feel like you would benefit from having more of these conversations alone or with your partner in a therapeutic setting, I would be happy to help you create the relationship and sex life you deserve and desire. You can visit my website, reclaimingstoriestherapy.com, learn more about my services, and schedule your free 30-minute video consultation online for us to chat more and see if we are a good fit to help you work towards your goals. As always, thank you for listening. And now back to the show. So, getting back to desire discrepancy and some of the things that people are feeling though when they come to see me. I think a lot of the times once we've gotten to a place where like sex has become an issue in your relationship, oftentimes the person that has a lower sex drive, there's a lot of interchanging words you can use. You could say sex drive, you could say libido, it doesn't really matter. Um, but that person tends to feel like, they're the problem. They tend to feel um, like they're guilty and shameful for not wanting sex. They feel obligated to have sex because their partner wants sex. And it becomes kind of this spiraling of, I don't know what to do. But on the opposite side of that, I think it can be equally as hard because the other partner sometimes can then feel undesired. They feel like, why doesn't my partner want me anymore? Why doesn't my partner want to have sex with me anymore? And sometimes become also guilty and shameful around their own sexuality, and it's like, "Well, why do I want sex so much? And I could be a monster, and I'm, like, wanting to force my partner to have sex even though they don't want to," and, just kind of feel like their own urges and wants and needs are not valid anymore. Um, so I think that's an interesting dynamic that can happen when we get to a point where, we're feeling like sex is not something that we can freely work with in our relationship. Like it kind of like you said, Alex, it becomes a chore. It becomes something that we're like desperately trying to grasp at, but we don't know how to get to the point where we both feel like there's an ease to flow in and out of it when we want to and when we don't.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've ever experienced it on that level or maybe not as much?
I don't think not quite as much, because I will say I think that it's something that means quite a bit to both of us. So
Mhm.
I do think it is one of the things that we both really try to kind of keep in the forefront of our mind as much as we can. Now, I
Mhm.
think that in the weekdays, I think we could definitely be a little bit better with it,
Mhm.
100%. But not quite as much, just because I know, at least with the both of us, what it means to us for our intimacy and connection. Like, that's a
Mhm.
big thing for the both of us to feel
Mhm.
that way.
Yeah.
So I think if now here's where I think it could be totally different is if I really didn't feel like I got intimacy and as much of an emotional, um what do I wanna call it? Not a response, but, an emotional connection to him through it. I
Mhm.
maybe I would maybe not want it as much,
Mhm.
but, I mean, and then I don't hate to say it, I guess, but, I mean, another whole part of it is also, like, I still find him incredibly attractive all the time.
Mhm.
Like, so I'm still at that stage where I'm just like, "I still love you. I think you're super hot, and
Mhm.
I wanna have sex with you."
Mhm.
Yeah, I do. What
Yeah.
about you? Where 'Cause I know your stage is a little different for you, because you guys have now gone from being the 2 of you for as many years as you were,
Mhm.
to now the entrance of your son in your life. So, what is that kind of transition? How has that kinda been for you guys?
Well, I think I'll back it up a little bit and talk
Okay.
about the fact that, like, we met in college. We met when we didn't have very many responsibilities except for school. I worked for a hot second and then quit because I was privileged that I didn't need to actually work um, to, like, have money. But going through grad school was definitely like the
That's stressful.
most stressful thing in the world, just like a whirlwind 2 years of just, like,
A
the
lot of work.
most anxiety I could probably ever experience, um,
You're not really
so
selling grad school very well right now. I hate to tell you. Anyone who's on the fence over here listening to this episode, they're like, "I really am contemplating grad school." It's like, "Okay, maybe now, not never mind."
Well, I mean, I don't know what all grad school looks like, but definitely becoming a therapist, I mean, you're doing school and, like, basically
Clinical hours.
working a part-time job too. So yeah, it's a lot, and then having to balance, like, normal life on top of that. It was just a lot. So, I think we went through a period of me having a lot lower desire during that time too because I was so stressed out, and stress and desire don't really go hand in hand. Um, so I think we had to work through that, and I did feel some of these things of, like, I felt like I was the problem, I felt bad, and I've never gotten to the point like you where I didn't want sex. It was never
Mhm.
that, it was just like, I don't know how to get myself into a space where I'm comfortable and ready for sex. It was just like sex felt like a
Okay.
chore, it felt like something that I didn't have time for, and I didn't it was just hard
It was
when I
another
was
thing on the plate.
yeah.
Like,
Mm,
I already have 73 things on my plate today,
right,
and this is just adding one more to it.
right, and so it wasn't like I didn't want it, but it was just like, how do we find the time to do that? And we had to talk a lot about that, and, we had some issues and some fights around it, and it, eventually got worked out, but that was kind of a stressful time, and then, yeah, going through pregnancy and motherhood is it's hard. It's hard on the sex life.
Can
Definitely
I
oh, go yeah.
I was just gonna ask, well, you might even just answer this in what you were gonna say, but I was gonna say, do you want it, like, more when you're pregnant, or do you feel like I feel freaking disgusting? I'm literally sharing my organs, everything with another person right now. I don't want you to touch me.
Yeah.
Or is it like, I really want you to touch me?
Well, everyone is going to experience it different. If you look out in this stuff that's online about pregnancy and sex, a lot of it is like, oh, women are going to feel way more sexual during pregnancy because there's a lot more blood flow actually going to that area. So to your clitoris and to your vulva area because of, all the changes that are happening to your body, and you're growing your uterus and the fetus is growing, blah, blah, blah. But they're not taking into account the different phases of pregnancy where the first trimester, you feel like absolute shit because not only are you growing a new being, but you're also growing a new organ to support that being for the rest of your pregnancy. And so the first trimester is just ugh, I mean, some women don't go through that as much. And, if you are one of those people, you
You're
should be
lucky.
very thankful. But yeah, I was like dead to the world my first trimester. And
'Cause you just
uh,
feel you're tired, you can feel sick, like, it's all the things.
yeah, it's literally, I mean, you will never have felt that tired in your life. Like it is
And
uh,
that's the fascinating thing is what people tell me, and they're like, "It's miraculous. You can, like, feel good for, like, 5 minutes, right?" And you're like, "Oh my god,
yep.
I have the energy to vacuum this room." And then you get halfway through it and you're like, "I don't even know how on earth I even started this. Like, what on earth is going on?"
Yeah, no, it's crazy that first trimester. And again, that's because you're growing a new human and you're growing the placenta,
Organ.
which is a whole new organ, guys, whole new organ.
We didn't start with one.
No, that will then sustain your baby for, the rest of your pregnancy, and
God,
that's
we are
why
fucking miraculous.
yeah,
We are bloody miraculous, and the fact that we don't get more credit for that, it's like, can men grow their own new organ? No, you can't. No.
no, yeah,
No.
no, I know, and then, you birth it with the baby, and then you grow another one the next time you get pregnant, so, the placentas are pretty fucking awesome, I'm just gonna put that out there. Um, But so, sex was not really on the table for that. And then usually once you get through the first trimester, and that's usually when the placenta is grown and starts kind of taking over baby's nutrition and whatnot, that's when you kind of enter into that phase where it's like, okay, now I'm starting to feel better. I have more energy. But for me, I had really, really bad acid reflux. And so
Oh,
that
right.
was a whole thing in trying to get under control because I also have an autoimmune issue, and it was just trying
You
to
had a
find the
lot going on.
balance of, like, trying to manage the acid reflux with also trying not to flare up all my autoimmune issues, and so it took a while to do that, and so I wasn't even really feeling good until I don't know, somewhere in my second trimester, and even then, it was still during COVID, my husband was working nights, I was home a lot by myself. It was just a lot, so it totally depends on the person, and then, yeah, by your third trimester, when your belly starts to get really big and your body starts to hurt, it's starting to take a lot more toll on like your back and your hips because you're carrying a lot of weight around in your front and your center of gravity is changing and all of these things. Like that I think is probably harder too. Again, there's some women that love that and, some men are really attracted to their pregnant wives, and so there's some people that have really great sex, throughout their entire pregnancy or even in certain aspects of their pregnancy, but for me, it even started to get to a point cuz things shift down there, and it was even like towards the end of my pregnancy like painful to have sex,
Oh,
which is something I've never experienced before, but a lot of people do. Both in pregnancy and outside
and
of
outside.
pregnancy. Um, and so, yeah, it was really uncomfortable, and so not something that I really even wanted to attempt, and until the end when we were trying to get baby out, and then it was like,
Come here.
just gonna push through the pain and get this baby out of me.
Did it work?
Um, yeah, I mean, sort of. That's kinda a whole other topic, but yeah, I would say yes. Yes, it did work.
I know you can't do spicy food. I can do spicy food. I know that ain't
No,
happening for you.
no.
But I mean,
I'll
I will
explain
say
why that works in a whole other episode, but yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Just seems kind of crazy to me, but that's okay.
yeah,
Will guys that believe me, we'll eventually make our way to pregnancy and all those different other aspects of life and things like that too. We'll get there. But
yeah,
okay, I think I'm to a point where there's a part that I think I would love for you to explain for our audience a little bit or kind of go into
okay,
that I think might be really helpful for some people. And for me, that would be what is kind of what's your little black book of the tips, tricks, things you can change or implement
mhm,
for when you guys are going through a period of like, let's say this might be for a couple where it's not that one person is at a level that the other one is not, and we started
right,
there, right? We got to this place.
yeah,
What do you like to recommend to your clients when they are
mhm,
struggling with that? And it's like, we want to get better at this and we
mhm,
don't want it to be like this anymore. But right now, we don't know how to get out of the routine. We don't mentally,
yeah,
physically, all of it. Like, we just are not sure how to move past this.
yep,
Where do you kind of like to steer them to? Because I think that might be really helpful for any of our audience who might be experiencing this, is kind of
yeah,
where do you like to guide them?
yeah. So, my favorite book, this is one of the best books in just sex therapy world in general, is called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. If I know how to say her last name right, I'm sorry, Emily, if you ever hear this, if I said your name wrong. But she is an amazing sex researcher and educator, and she kind of created the ways that we deal with desire. So I will go into a few of those things. So, one, there are two types of desire, guys. Two types. One is what we call spontaneous desire. So that's like what we all think of as desire, where it kind of just like hits you out of the blue and you're like, oh my God, I'm randomly horny now. I want to have sex.
Okay.
And that's kind of how we normally think about
That
it.
makes sense. It's spontaneous.
Yep.
Okay.
The other one is what we call responsive desire. So it's more of I have to get the engine running in my head first before I'm feeling it in my body. And your
Makes total sense.
brain is a really essential part to this process. So even just knowing that for some people is super duper helpful because, again, in our society, we really look at sex from a male perspective. And I think most of the time, men get an erection and then they're like, oh, I'm ready for sex. And so now I'm horny. And so it's more of like a body first, then brain process
We're
versus
opposite.
brain first, then body process. Um, so, how do we cultivate responsive desire? So, responsive means you are responding to the different types of sexual stimuli, if you will, or the things that are turning you on. And we also have to turn things off that are turning you off to get you to a place where you want to have sex. So this goes into, and this is getting a little clinical, but I promise I'm trying to make sure that you understand this. So this gets into what she calls the dual control model. So this is basically like a gas and a brake in a car. So we all have an accelerator, something that helps kind of take in sexual stimuli and says, you want sex right now.
Yeah.
We also have a brake that takes in sexual stimuli and says, you do not want sex right now. So knowing that those things are working at the same time is helpful to know that there are things that are probably going to be pushing your brakes and there are things that are probably going to be pushing your accelerator. So for me, I really like emotional connection. I really like to have a conversation with my husband. I really like to be silly and to kind of like get out of the stress and the anxiety of my day before I can enter into sex with him. So that for me is an accelerator when we can just have a conversation and feel
Be
connected in that
playful and
way.
have a good time. Yeah.
Yeah. A break for me is when I'm focusing on something else and don't even have sex on the brain, and then my husband comes over and tries to start initiating sex with me by, like, slapping me on the butt or something like that. That is a break for me. So working through what are things that you know are breaks or barriers to you having sex, and what are things that create more ease and flexibility to you being able to have desire for sex can be really helpful. Now, all of this also has to be housed in a context. So I was kind of already alluding to that, but we have like external circumstances that is a context and also internal states that are context. So you let's say you are not Alex who doesn't have anybody else in your house,
Okay.
and you are me that has other people in the house. So maybe you're in the kitchen or you're in the living room and there's anxiety around other people walking by and catching what you guys are doing. And so if your partner comes up and starts to try to initiate with you, you might not be receptive to that because it's like, this is not the time and place to do that. Or more of my favorite one, when again, you're like focused completely on something else. Maybe you're doing the laundry, maybe you're making dinner or doing the dishes or whatever, and have like a whole list of things that you're trying to get done before you're ready to, pack it up for the day or just sit down and relax. And your partner comes over and tries to start initiating sex with you. Like, you're probably like, this is not a good time. I'm trying to get all this other shit done. So, external circumstances, that's what happens. Or if you're in the bedroom and you know that you have childcare and that you're not going to be interrupted for a while and your partner starts to try to initiate sex, then that might feel a lot better because you're like, we have a physical barrier, nobody's here, nobody's going to see us, and we have time. So, that could be an external circumstance. The internal circumstance, like I was trying to mention before, is what are our thoughts and beliefs about sex? Do you enter into sex where you think sex is really scary, it's gross, I don't like it, maybe it's painful, it's only for my partner, I just feel like I have to give sex to my partner? Then if your partner's initiating sex with you and that's your internal state of how you think about sex, you're probably not gonna be super desiring of sex.
No.
If your partner initiates and you have the thought process of like, yeah, I love sex. I deserve pleasure. I know that I can ask for the things that I want, that we have open communication during sex, and I really enjoy this experience with my partner. That's probably going to be a lot different way of approaching it. And you're probably going to feel a lot more desire. So there's a lot of different factors to try and work on here and kind of entering points. But those are really important things to know. One, that you can create desire. It's not just something that you either have or you don't. And if you don't, how do we get it? We get it by creating it if you don't. The ways to create it are to know what are your brakes and accelerators? What are the things that are going to take you out of feeling desire? And what are the things that are going to help you actually feel desire? And within those, what is the context that you need to experience those things in? Do you need, time away from the stress and, just normal routine that you have during the day to be able to enter into that space with yourself? If so, how do we be intentional about creating that space for yourself? How do you make sure that, maybe you set a day and time where you say, I'm not gonna do chores anymore after this point in time. Trust me, the chore list will be there when you come back, it never goes away. Um, and, intentionally make some time to connect with your partner or connect to yourself. I also really love movement. I think that can be really helpful in connecting yourself to your body. So I really like yoga, or you could go and take a bath or something that just makes you feel like elegant and sexy. And so sometimes it's creating the space and the time for you to do the things that are going to help you get to that point where you can engage in sex with your partner because it's fueling that desire.
Sometimes a
Yeah.
great outfit does it for me. If I put on an outfit and I'm like, "Oh my god, I feel great in this." Like,
Mhm.
I just feel like I really just played Barbie dress up today and, like, I nailed it.
Yeah.
I love that one.
Yeah.
That's probably really narcissistic of me to say that, and I am self-aware enough to notice that, but for whatever reason, I don't know why, but when I'm in a really good outfit, I'm like, "I'm feeling myself today."
Yeah. Well, just like I've said before, I think confidence is a really important thing. And I think one of the biggest breaks that I encounter with a lot of people is people feeling really negatively about themselves and their bodies. When we are feeling like I'm, overweight and I don't like myself, and you're telling yourself all these really negative things, like that's not going to help you feel desire to have sex with your partner. There's also a lot of insecurity around, do I want my partner to see me like this and all of these things? So, again, knowing what are your breaks is really important because those are the things that we need to be working on to get you to feeling like we can turn those brakes off and then help fuel the things that are going to push your accelerator so that you can get that desire going. And so, yeah, wearing a great outfit that you feel awesome in, if you want to put on lingerie, great. That's
God,
not
I was
a
so mad.
requirement.
I will just tell because we're recording this, ladies and gentlemen, on the 9th of February, so we're coming up on
Mhm.
Valentine's Day next week.
Yeah.
I was so mad. I was at my desk this week. I found the cutest lingerie set online from this company that I love. Shout out, I'll shout them out because if none of you know who they are, she makes the most amazing like silk lingerie and other fun stuff. And it's called The Bar. And it's out of New York. Great. She makes great sweats too, just in case you
Mm,
want those. But anyways, I found this super cute lingerie. I was like, oh my God, it's coming out this week. So I sent it to my partner on Instagram and I was like, oh, by the way, I am obsessed with this set. Like, I love
mhm,
it. I
mhm,
felt so bad. He went to it was, like, dropping the next day, like, it hadn't actually released yet,
mhm,
and he went to the website, got the information, put in his email to get a 10% off coupon, went to the website when it went live Eastern time, and girls had already fully sold all of it out, and it was so
mm.
cute because he came home and he goes, "I really tried to get it because, like, selfishly, I loved it too, but it was gone," and I'm like, "Well, she makes wedding sets, get one for the wedding." I don't know, but that was just a funny one that you brought up that because I was like, "I literally tried that this week, but it
Yeah,
was sold out by the time I got to it."
yeah. And if you don't like lingerie, that's fine. If you're
Yeah,
like
you don't have
me
to.
and feel like lingerie is a waste of time and money because it's just gonna be taken off in 5 seconds anyway, I agree with you. That it can be fun to wear. I would say do it for you, not your partner. I mean, if you
No,
wanna
I
do it for
love
your
this
partner,
shit.
it's
Oh,
fine, but make sure it's for you. Make sure you feel confident in it and it makes you feel good. And if you don't wanna wear lingerie, don't wear lingerie. I swear your
no.
partner is gonna love you more probably if you're naked than in lingerie anyway, so
100%, 100%. I was just saying it's one that I love that, like, riles me
yeah.
up because I love
Yeah,
clothing and I like to play dress up. So I'm like, "Okay, it, like, combines all my favorite things together, and you get enjoyment out of it too."
right, exactly. So
Yeah.
finding ways to feel confident in yourself. I was gonna say when you were talking about just being in a perpetual state of retirement, I think it's great that, you have low anxiety, but I think there also is a piece of this where it's like you have to be a full, complete human being also to access your sexuality. You need to feel like you have purpose and that you are being able to create and do all these things. And so, knowing that like your mental and physical health also play an important piece in how you feel about yourself and how you're going to be able to show up and access that. If you're feeling really shitty, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling anxious, if you have trauma that you've gone through, a lot of those things can be breaks for people that they have to work through in order to get to a place where they are feeling more comfortable or just, have more space to access that for themselves. So yeah, I know that's been a lot of kind of clinical stuff, but hopefully it makes sense.
I think it
Do
makes
you
perfect sense is how I'm gonna feel because I will say this, guys, listeners, hey, I am not in the clinical space that Kayla is. I'm just
Mhm,
like, I know how I feel and I know what I think about and topics I
mhm,
can come up with, but I don't know why they are, or what they are, or
mhm,
anything further from this, right? I fully understood all of the things that you said today. I think we gave people some great tools to put in their sex toolbox too.
mhm,
Like I love your analogy of the brake and the pedal, and I will not. We don't even have time for me to get into a car thing where it almost seems more like a manual transmission where you've got a clutch, a brake, and a gas. But
yeah,
that is totally okay. That is not necessary for this whatsoever. But I just think it does just make so much more sense so that I think that people can I think the way that you explained it, what I loved about how you did this today is I really love that you can exactly see who you are in the situations
mhm,
you're bringing up, right? Like
mhm,
external versus internal. Where am I feeling at that point?
mhm,
How is my partner? How does he or she like
mhm,
where do they get these things from? And where can I then
mhm,
notice that in our life
mhm.
so I can see when I want to create a more responsive
Desire.
yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that it's been some great tools for them
Mhm,
to take. I mean, it makes sense to me. There are a couple things from this that I'm like, oh, okay, I can kind of alter a couple of these things and see how that does.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully this gives you some few takeaways. And, I will post to our show notes the book that I had recommended. And she has a few other media things that she's created around that book. She also created a podcast that is just a series of episodes that kind of talks about different aspects that she talks about in the book with real life situations and real life scenarios. And then there's also a great video that she made on YouTube that's like 10 minutes and then it explains all the things that I just went through. So I send that to my clients a lot to look at since it's an easy, like 10-minute video to watch and get a lot of good information on. So I will post that to our show notes so that you have more resources to dive deeper into this topic if this is something that you are wanting to know more about. And I think with that, we are at the end of our episode for today.
Also, everybody, just a little reminder too, um, for anyone who is listening to this as well. Any of the topics or any time we because I know that our first couple were more you getting to know us and us kind of trying to get a rapport with you. So you understand who we are, why we're doing this, all of that, right?
Mhm,
Now that we actually get into these kind of different topics, I will also just say, please, if anyone who listens to this has something you want us to talk about, or you have a question about something in the episode, anything like that, we
mm,
will keep any question, anything like that, anonymous. But
mhm,
please, if we're on Instagram at her on top pod, go check us out there. Send us a DM. If you send us a DM, we will not say your name, your handle, anything like
mm-mm,
that. But I just want you guys to know that if there's something you want us to expand on from this, please, we would love to do that for you. So, always anonymous, but let us know if there's something you want us to cover because we're happy to. And we're open to just wanting to go over any part of the sexual experience with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We want this to be a collaborative process and would love to start to create our community of people. So we want to hear from you and know how this is resonating with you. And yes, if there are things that you want to know more about for us to cover in future episodes as well. So as always, thank you so much for listening. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. And like Alex just said, please leave us a review with any questions or comments you have for the show. You can also follow us on Instagram at Her on Top Pod, and we would love to just see you back at our next episode in a couple weeks.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great, weekend, whatever it is for you when you're listening. And yeah, please tune back in because we love bringing this content to you guys. We have a great time with it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care, guys. See you next time. Bye.